What's going on, everybody? My name is Greg Peters, and today on the Car Passion channel, we'll be taking a deep analytical dive into the quarter-mile passes from Tucson. I've got a bunch of information that was collected by the Dragy, which we'll compare to the time slips. I got data logs, I got footage. I'll be addressing some of your guys' beautiful comments on that video, and we'll take a closer look at, let's be honest, some of the best launches YouTube has ever seen. I think you guys will be learning something about going faster today, which is what this is all about. Without further ado, let's jump the heck into this. Now, if this video sounds to you like it's just some gigantic racer excuse as to why the car should be able to go faster, then you're kind of missing the point of this video. I want this video to be educational and maybe to help people out there go faster. Now, anyone who's followed the build from the beginning knows that I didn't build this as a quarter-mile car. It just happens to have a lot of power, and it happens to be pretty light, and a byproduct of that is being able to go relatively fast. The Miata, I built it to be just a fun street car. Some days, I just want to drive the car to 7-Eleven. Other days, I want to drive the car to 7-Eleven and leave an SRT8 parked on the freeway, and I can do that. It's just, you fire it up and it's just a Miata. It does Miata things and it's got a lot of power. So let's address one of the most popular comments on my video, and that is that I was sleeping at the light. Oh, my reaction times, they were just horrid. And in drag racing, when you're sitting on the line, you have a certain amount of things that you have to worry about. You know, timing the light and, worrying about the guy next to me were not two of the things that I really cared about. So if I could eliminate a couple of those things and just focus on getting the car down the track, I'm fine with that. And to the people that were saying, well, if you would just improve your reaction time, you could have got an 11. And that is not how it works. The time doesn't start until the car moves. So if I sat on the green light for 3 minutes and then I made a pass, I could still get an 11-second slip. And on the topic of reaction time, it just wouldn't have been that cool to me to go home and go, oh, I got a perfect reaction time. If I wanted to flex my reaction time, I would have just gone back to one of, I don't know, the other several hundred passes that I've made. And I would have pulled, let's see, this random slip, a 5:15. So that's a 0.01 reaction time. I could have brought my Razor scooter to the drag strip and got a perfect reaction time. But I wouldn't care. Like, the reaction time has nothing to do with how fast the car is. Another one is if I would just put a real set of slicks on the car that it could go 11s, and although that's true, it would make it easier. The car does not need anything to go 11s. It ran a 12.0 with a terrible launch. The only thing that really needs to be adjusted is the torque on the nut between the steering wheel and the seat. Speaking of launches, okay, let's get this out of the way. Let's talk about the launches. Now, I know everyone in the comments section is a professional drag racer. But I have no problem admitting that I am just not very good at launching, specifically on a prepped surface. Now, if you've never been on a prepped surface with sticky road race tires, which have super stiff sidewalls and stiff rear springs and a very grabby clutch, and by prepared surface, I mean when people walk across the surface, it pulls their shoes off, okay? It's not like launching on the street. No. But if you've never done that before, go easy on me, okay? My experience is pretty limited. That was the first time ever having the car on a prepared surface with that setup, and only my second time ever being on a prepared surface with any car. Now, when you're launching a car on a street surface, like out in Ricer Alley, or like basically all the other drag racing videos on my channel that was in an event called Race Legal, and they did not have any track prep. Launching at Race Legal is basically like launching on the street, or possibly even less grip than the street. It's just a flat piece of concrete with nothing on it. You have to find a way to limit the power between the engine and the ground. You have to get the car off the line, and you have to match the engine of the RPM with the speed of the vehicle, and then you're off to the races. Now, there are two ways you can essentially do this. Number one is by slipping the clutch a lot off the line. So you're able to apply some higher RPM power to a car that's not moving and roll it out. Now, the other way to do it, particularly on a street surface, is you can just rev up to your desired RPM and you dump the clutch completely and you let the tires spin, and then when the speed of the vehicle catches up to the speed of the tires, you roll into it. You know, when you can feel the tires start to hook up, you lay into the throttle and you can apply a bunch more power, and it slingshots you out of the hole. Immediately people are thinking doing a burnout off the line is not the fast way to win a drag race, but if you think about it, you are only limiting the power between the engine and the ground. Now, whether you do that via slipping the clutch or slipping the tires, you're effectively achieving the same thing. And why I've always gone to just spinning the tires a little bit, you don't want to blow the tires off, but you spin them a little bit, is tires are cheaper and way easier to change than a clutch. I used to do so many passes in my cars that I didn't want to burn the clutch up. I didn't really care about the tires. So yes, that is the way I'm good at launching. On a prepped surface, there is only one way to launch. You cannot spin the tires to get the car off the line. You have to slip the clutch. And I just don't have the practice doing that, so obviously I wasn't very good at it. Now, I talked about in my video, I need to lower the launch control RPM. And what I should have been doing, and probably what I eventually would have been able to figure out had I been able to get more than 4 passes, is I think if I would have raised the RPM quite a bit on the launch, and use less throttle and more clutch slip, it would have been a lot better. And on the 4th pass, you can see that I was starting to lean that direction. That's the general concept. I just didn't go ham enough. It's not even the first 60 feet that's difficult in the Miata. It's like the first 20 feet. It's just getting the clutch out. Once the clutch is out, once the car's rolling, those tires have excellent traction. And my best 60 foot was a 2:19 or a 2.19 seconds, and they say that for every 1/10 of a second on the 60 foot, it equates to 2/10 of a second on the 1/4 mile. And I know that a Miata on pretty sticky street tires should be able to run a 1.9 60 foot without any sort of miraculous skill. So if I were to take 2/10 off the 60 foot, yeah, it would easily go into the 11s exactly how it sits. All right, let's get into some of the actual data analysis, my most favoriteest thing in the world. And what I want to start with is the Dragy. If you guys don't know what the Dragy is, I will link a video down below where I talk about how it works and all that. Basically, it's a GPS performance measuring device. And one thing, even though it's been tested already before online 1,000 times, I wanted to test it for myself. How accurate could the Dragy be against the actual time slips? So let's take a look here. So on screen, I've got the time slip for my fastest pass, a 12:08 at 124.72. And what did Dragy come up with? A 12:07 at 124.65. Incredible accuracy. And let's take a look at the 8th mile here. It was an 8:10 at 95.1. And Dragy comes up with an 8:09 at 95.2. That is about 0.1% margin of error on that. And same thing with the 60 foot. Actual 60 was a 2:19, almost a 2:20, and the Dragy came up with a 2:21. All right, so even though the launches were very bad by drag racing standards on that sticky surface, how good or bad was the 0 to 60? I mean, the amount of grip on the track certainly makes up for a poor launch, and the car still gets out of the hole pretty well. So let's take a look here. From my fastest pass, the Dragy recorded a 4.06 0 to 60. And if you guys remember, when I tested the car out on the streets, my fastest 0 to 60 was 3.77. ran a faster 0 to 60 on an unprepped, low grip by comparison, street surface versus what I did. Like, that's how bad the launches were. Okay, but this is not just about me roasting myself for the launches. This tells me something pretty interesting. If the car can do 0 to 60 0.3 of a second faster within the same distance, as you can see here, that means on this 0 to 60 run, if I would have followed through and done a full quarter mile, assuming there was enough room, it should have been an 11.7 street moon pass on the. So basically what I'm saying is, I believe the car as it sits would be able to run an 11-second pass on the moon. Now, there's a little bit of a problem with moon poles. Number one, the moon is just covered with craters. It's so difficult to find a long enough, straight enough, flat enough road with, there's just so, I mean, if you've never been there, you wouldn't understand, but there are literally craters everywhere, and you have to find a perfectly straight path to be able to do a good, clean, draggy run. And the second major hurdle is the lunar cops. If you get pulled over by a lunar cop going 0.000019% the speed of light, which is how fast the car will go on a quarter-mile pass, you get in big trouble. But maybe for the cred, I'll give it a try, okay? Undecided. But man, after proving how accurate the Dragy is, you bet if I were to run an 11-second pass on the moon via Dragy, I'm calling that Miata an 11-second car as it sits. And although it would be cool to fit it with slicks and skinnies and try to go for a 10-second pass, I personally think it's cooler to show off how fast it is in 100% street trim without having to change anything around. You just roll it to the track and this is how fast it goes. That's like all the cars I've ever built, that's what I think is the coolest. It's a street car. You don't have to change a bunch of things and say, oh, this is how fast it goes when you change the setup on everything. I want to know how fast it goes in 7-Eleven form. Now that shifts me right into the next thing I want to talk about, which is breaking down this time slip in terms of ET versus trap speed. Now, previously I spoke about the fact that you can look at trap speed as an indicator of how much horsepower that car has. The launch really doesn't matter, which is why I care about trap speed so much, because that's like it's like your roll racing power, basically. If you take a car that runs 12 seconds at 125 versus a car that runs 10 seconds at 125, and you line them up on the freeway, that's gonna be a dead even race. It's just a horsepower thing. And although I didn't do it on purpose, my first pass of the night was a perfect example and perfect proof that this is true. And the car came out of gear on the launch. So it ran a 4-second 60 foot. The car ran 15.4 seconds. That was the pass. So if you tell someone you have a 15.4 second Miata, that's obviously not very impressive. But the trap speed was 123.5. It was only 1 mile per hour off with the worst launch possible. And by looking at that trap speed, 123.5, you could assume that Miata has got roughly 400 horsepower. So that brings me to the next thing I want to talk about, which is another acceleration test, and that is the 100 to 200 kilometer per hour test. Something I've gone out and tested and tuned for previously, and I know how fast the car can do it. So how fast was it running at the night of the drags? It produced a 100 to 200K of 7.15 seconds. Now my best ever 100 to 200 was 6.67 seconds. Now, although a 7.1 is relatively close, that means the car was technically not running at the power level that it was when I ran that faster run, which basically tells me the car does have a little bit more left in it as far as that mile per hour, maybe 125, maybe 126. I don't really know, which is why I want to do a little bit more testing on the moon. The next thing I want to talk about are the data logs from the passes, and there are 2 reasons why I want to talk about these. Number one, it's another way for me to look into seeing how the car did on those specific passes and if there was any red flags or anything that was going on with the car, which I actually did find a problem that happened, which I will show you guys on the car itself in just a second. But the other thing is, I want to bring to light a point that I think not everyone thinks about. Just because you loaded a tune into your ECU at some point in the past doesn't mean your car is always going to run perfectly consistent in the same way every day, every race, every pass. And just because you dynoed your car and it made a certain number one day in the past doesn't mean it's going to make that same exact power every day in all weather conditions. It's not always the same, and that's why I encourage so heavily to learn how to take a data log, learn how to read a data log, get into your tuning software and get familiar with it. It can be daunting at first, but if you just get in and start getting familiar with things and learn about the things that you can safely change or you feel comfortable with changing, it just makes owning a tuned car like a better experience. You just understand so much more of what's going on with your car. You can open a data log and go, oh, it was running a point rich there, or that's weird, it's running 2 psi less or 2 psi more than what it was tuned on. I wonder why. Like, is it a tuning issue? Is it a mechanical issue with the boost controller setup or something like that? And guys, it can only help you. Learning can only help you. That's why I run this channel the way I do. I just feel like the more you learn, the more enjoyable of an experience it is to own a turbo car or just any car in general, especially if you're working on it yourself. Let's take a look at fourth gear. The number one thing that I realized here is look at above 7,000 RPM. Look how crazy rich it's going. Now, there's a point where you want to run a little extra rich for safety, and then there's the point where you're running so rich that all you're doing is robbing power. And I found that on my engine, at least all the tuning that I've experimented with, that usually happens somewhere around the low 10s and especially into the high 9s. This was at the very end of the pass. It's not making a huge difference, but it could be one of the reasons why the car only ran a 7.1 100 to 200K instead of a 6.6. Boost is in red here. You can see that it is also dropping off at redline, but I think that's just a product of the turbo being completely out of air. One more thing I want to check out here. Let's look at pass number 4, and I'm specifically looking at the boost here. In between shifts, you can see the pressure drops off drastically, and then as soon as I get back on throttle again, it is peaking at 25 psi. And although ignore the AFR, by the way, for some reason my wideband was not reading right here. Obviously it's not 21:1. Anyways, 25 psi, even though the car is tuned up there, it was going way higher than when I was testing it on the street, and I found out a reason for that. Come on out to the Miata. Let me show you something. Now, I haven't opened the hood on the Miata since before the event, but I can already tell you what happened here because of how the boost was acting on the way home from the track. I believe my wastegate dome came off. Yeah. What happens when you forget to tighten the wastegate dome is it just comes off and then you have no boost control. It basically forces the turbo to run the maximum amount of boost possible. I'm sure what I did is I hand tightened the ring on that thing, I installed it, and I forgot to give it the final torque, so that's my bad. Now, it actually didn't have a huge effect on the passes because that turbo is so maxed out, it's only gonna run a certain amount of boost anyways before it's just completely out of air and it just won't spin any faster. But definitely on the launch, I noticed the car was getting into quite a bit more boost than it should have. You can see 22.7 pounds of boost in first gear. And as you remember, I was running 0% boost duty cycle. The max it should have been able to get to was about 16 or 17 pounds. So that was something that I really didn't notice at the track, but in the logs, obviously it shows. So get that tuned up for next time. So that's basically everything that I found interesting about the information that I collected from race night. If there are any specifics I didn't talk about, you could drop a question down below in the comments and I'll see if I have any more information for you. As far as the drag racing future for my non-drag racing Miata, I probably will take the car out at some point to run an 11-second moon pass for the cred, or at least attempt it. And there is also a local 8th mile track that I've never run my car at before that's got a very sticky, prepped surface. I've personally seen a car run a 4-second pass there, which is equivalent to a 7-second quarter. That's like what Cletus's Corvettes can do. Very, very fast. The 8th mile that I always used to go to, unfortunately, shut down a while ago, and it's not coming back. That was called race legal, so I won't be back there, but it would be good to go to a nice sticky surface to get some practice on launching there and get better at that. And I know if the car can run an 8 flat or a 7.9 on the 8th mile, that's into the 11s and a quarter. And the next time I go to the quarter mile, I'll be a little bit more well-versed with my launches. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, if you learned something, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe if you are new, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace out.